want to share the story of Imagine Church. When we first launched many years ago, 9 to 10 years ago now, Pastor Annie and I began a journey where we began to think about this, pray about this, and the church started under the name Church Under Grace. Some of you might not even know that we started as Church Under Grace. That was the initial name of the church as we launched in this new covenant theology, and I can just remember the amount of prayer, the amount of seeking God, the amount of time spent seeking wisdom from others. And Dr. Andrew Farley was one of them, where I was communicating with him, asking him for guidance and wisdom. And the Lord began to bring confirmation into our seeking him about launching a church. And it reached a point where the confirmation was so clear and so strong that you just knew. I knew that it was time. I knew that God was affirming this, that God was blessing this, that God was confirming this. And as that began to happen, I'll have you know that launching a church is not an easy proposition. It's actually kind of scary because you really don't know what's going to happen. There's no guarantees when you launch a church. Especially us, we'd never done this before. I had been a part of ministry for so many years, but never in this role of leading a church forward and planting a church. So I was mindful of all the promises that God had. I was mindful of the fact that God would provide everything that we needed as a body. And these are the things that are going through your mind when you're launching a church or when you're launching anything new, an initiative. You're thinking about, okay, what do I need? And there are variables and things involved with when we launched the church that we knew God would have to provide in order for us to make it. You guys with me today? And so I had the promises of God on one side of my brain, but I had the problems on the other side of my brain. Come on, somebody. In other words, I had things that I was concerned about. I had thoughts and doubts that I was wrestling with. I remember vividly one of my thoughts was, what are other people going to think about me and my wife, little old us, when we declare that we're launching a church? I was worried about what other people would think of me. What would the other pastors think of me? What would my friends think of us for stepping? What would my family, how would they respond? And I was wrestling with these kinds of things. And then I had self-doubt. Come on, has anybody ever had self-doubt? Maybe I don't got what it takes. Maybe I don't have the giftings. Maybe I don't have the leadership prowess that is required. And of course, we compare ourselves to other people, and we look at other great leaders and those orators of the gospel with those deep voices who can just command the room and all of those things. I compare myself. And of course, I was wrestling with self-doubt, and I was wondering at the time, God, we're going to need a team. Like, who's going to launch this with us? And it's so vivid how this all happened. And God just brought us a team of about 30 people. And our launch team was as big as this group is right here. And we had a launch team, and we launched at Rock Creek Elementary. And at the time, I was thinking about resources. I was having doubts of failure. And I just want to tell you that this experience is very common if you are a human being on planet Earth and you do anything with your life. If you get married, if you have kids, if you start a business, if you're stepping into ministry, if you're doing anything, then you are going to have a promise, a sense that God can do something. God will do something in this, but also you'll have all of the problems that you can see. And so Israel was at this precipice. They were in this moment at the edge of its promise. And the promise for Israel was a land flowing with milk and honey. The promise was not salvation. They'd already been saved from Egypt, which symbolizes sin and death. And so they were saved from Egypt, but they were wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, and the promised land was a homeland. Come on, somebody. The promised land was a place where they could say, this is our home, this is our people, this is where we belong. And it wasn't just some ordinary land, it was a land that flowed with milk and honey. That land is still in existence today. Those borders and boundaries, borderies, yeah, I like that. That's a marketing phrase. Borderies are still in existence today, and they still belong to Israel. Isn't it amazing that this is still happening today? The fight for the land, the Holy Land. But this was their promised land. Now, our promised land is not salvation. Crossing the Jordan is not to cross into salvation. That is a false theology. Our crossing of the Jordan into a promised land is the fulfillment of the promises of God in our lives. It's walking out the victory that he's promised us, the destiny that he's promised us, the purpose that he's put in our lives. And these are the things that now that we're believers and we're saved and we're sealed and we're the finished work of Christ has done its work in our lives, and we get to say, praise the Lord, glory, hallelujah, and all of those things, and God has done a work in us. Now we walk into a season where we're leaving the wilderness and we're entering into a promised land of victory, destiny, and purpose. You guys follow that analogy? Okay. Every person has that in their lives. Every church has that in their existence. Every family has that. Every individual has that. A purpose. Something that God wants to bring them into in order to fulfill its promises. So Israel could see the promised land. It's like you could touch it, you could smell it, you could see it. But they had to deal with their fear. They had to deal with their doubt. They had to deal with their past struggles. And how they responded would determine whether or not they were able to enter the promised land that God had promised them. And so in Numbers chapters 13 and 14, this is where the Bible opens up this portion of the journey of the Israelites when they were right there. Right there. Problems or promises? That's my question to you this morning. Do you see the problems or do you see the promises? My first point is that what you see determines what you believe. What you choose to see will determine what you believe about what God is saying. In Numbers 13, starting in verse 25, we're going to read through this. At the end of the 40 days, they returned from exploring the land. Now, at this point, as they were poised in the promised land, Moses sent 12 spies into the land. And those 12 spies, each spy represented a tribe of Israel, the 12 tribes. And those spies went in to scope out the land, to spy out the land. And they were charged with go check it out for us and bring back your reports. And so they went out for those 40 days and they returned from exploring the land. Next verse. And they came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community in the desert of Paran. And there they reported to them, to the whole assembly, and showed them the fruit of the land. They gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. They brought some fruit back, and they were like, look, this is a great thing. This is an incredible land. The land is amazing. The promise, incredible. There's milk, there's honey, it's flowing, it's good, it's rich, it's everything you could ever ask for or wish for. Next verse. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. Next verse. And the Amalekites live in the Negev, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan. Wow. Next verse. Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. Next verse. But the men who had gone with him said, we can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are. And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land that they had explored. They said, the land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. They're giants. And we saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak came from the Nephilim. And we seemed like grasshoppers in our own sights. And we looked the same to them. And so the point of this is that Caleb was looking at the promise and was believing that although the giants were great, and although there were lots of people and lots of enemies and lots of work to be done, Caleb believed that God would deliver the land to them. That they were not fighting these people, they would not need to dispossess these inhabitants of the land on their own. And so Caleb was seeing the promises. And because he saw the promise of God, his belief shifted in that direction. He believed that they could take it. He was focused on the power of God. He was focused on how God had delivered them. He was focused on how God had provided for them, how God had done miracle after miracle. I mean, they were literally on a journey of a miraculous kind of journey. Manna falling from heaven, quail coming, water coming out of a rock, a Red Sea parting. It's like this, we can do this. God is surely going to help us, and we're not going to fight this battle. God's going to fight this battle. Come on, somebody. But the other 10 spies, they saw the problems. What were they focused on? They were focused on the size of the giants. They were focused on the fortified cities. They saw grasshoppers. They were like, look, we're just like little old grasshoppers. Like, we don't stand a chance against these people. There's no way. There's no way. And of course, in the natural, there probably was no way. You see, but we don't walk by what we see. Come on, somebody. We walk by faith, not by sight. And so Caleb had faith, and the rest of them only believed what they could see. I calculated this. I've added up the math. I put this together. In my natural finite understanding and thinking, I cannot comprehend how we could possibly take this land, because the people are too great. The cities are too fortified. And because of that, the people, they were hurled into a state of fear, and they did not believe that they could move in that direction. You know, there's this thing called the placebo effect. And this is a study that was done. And that what they did is they took a bunch of people who were sick, and they gave them sugar pills. Pills that did nothing. Basically fake medicine. And what they found in those studies is that often the people who believed they were taking something that would heal them would actually be healed. There was something so powerful about believing that they would be healed. Just by taking a sugar pill, many of them were actually healed. Their body responded to what they believed would happen after they took this pill. Do you guys follow me? There is something so powerful about believing that God will do something, about believing that good things are going to happen, about believing that doors are going to open. And when you start to believe this, something really begins to happen. There's also another study that was done. I don't know if I can pronounce this correctly, the Pygmalion effect. And in this study, this is another study done by researchers and scientists, and they basically studied students and how the students would respond to the affirmation of their teachers. And so the teachers randomly picked, they randomized the students, and they said to a random group of students, you are a blossoming student. You are an incredible academic mind. You are absolutely one of the best students. And they began to reinforce that feeling and that faith and belief and identity in the students. And what the study showed is that those students who were randomly picked far outperformed the other students. Isn't that so powerful? There's a Christian doctor and scientist named Dr. Carolyn Leaf, and she found that when people shift their thinking from negative fear-based thoughts to faith-based thoughts, their brain waves are rewired, and it releases chemicals that promote healing and clarity. In other words, if you change your paradigm and begin to speak life and speak faith and begin to believe that God is with us and God's moving and God's doing something in my life and God's going to move in my body and God's going to touch my child and God's going to move in our marriage and God's going to move on my business, when you begin to see that, believe that, declare that, speak that, and stand on the promises of God, then something amazing happens, because you begin to walk by faith. When you stand in faith, it's a powerful thing. Faith is like a shield. Faith is a shield to every fiery dart, every doubt, everything the enemy wants to throw at us, everything we see. Like Peter walking on the water. As long as he had his eyes fixed on Jesus, he was able to defy the laws of nature and walk on water. But as soon as he looked at the problems, come on somebody, here come the waves. Here comes a wind, and I'm looking at this. What did I get myself into out here? Come on, somebody. And now he begins to sink. Ladies and gentlemen, this is how we are called to function. We cannot enter the promised land if we are preoccupied by the problems instead of the promise. What does this look like in real life? Well, maybe you have an opportunity to start a business or to have a career move in your life. And if you're a human, you might have your own self-doubt. I don't know if I can handle that manager position. I don't know if I can handle that director role. I don't know if I can handle this new position. I don't know. I don't know if I'm qualified to do this. And we can talk ourselves out of the blessing God wants to bring into our lives. Or we could say, I know that God will equip me for this role. I know that he's not going to open a door for me and allow me to fall and fail. I know that the favor and presence of God is with me wherever I go. I know that God is going to see me through and be my shield and walk with me as I venture into this new job that the door is open for me. Maybe you have marriage problems and there's communication issues and there's all kinds of stuff. And sometimes we can slip into seeing the problem, and the problem gets so preoccupied in our minds, and we say things like, I don't think we can ever fix these communication issues. I don't think we can ever fix these patterns and these cycles that we go through. You see, but seeing faith says that I know that God will heal and restore our marriage. I know that God can do anything. I know that what's impossible with us is possible with him. And so I see that, I recognize that there's giants in the land, but I'm not going to allow the giants that I see to dissuade me from keeping my eyes fixed on Jesus, believing his promises until the very end. Maybe you have a dream in your life. And you're saying to yourself, it seems like nothing I ever attempt works. And God is saying to you, I'm going to bless everything you do. I'm going to touch your hands. I'm going to touch your feet, and you will be blessed. A second point, we're going to keep this short today. We got a Super Bowl to go watch. Go Eagles. Come on, go Eagles. Don't be talking about Tom Brady's not the GOAT because of some young quarterback who has a chance of a three-peat. I care about that, honey. I care about the Super Bowl. My wife's keeping me on track. Let's move forward. My next point, the decision to complain will kill your destiny. The decision to complain will kill your destiny. Numbers 14, 1 through 4. And that night, all the members of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. I mean, can you blame them after a report like that? They were upset. They were deeply troubled and afraid. And they began to raise their voices. They began to have a commotion. Moses had a big problem on his hands. Come on, somebody. Big problem. Next verse. And the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron and the whole assembly. The whole assembly. In other words, the whole assembly. Everybody. Said to them, if we had only had died in Egypt or in this wilderness. Well, because they were like, we're gonna go in there and they're gonna kill our wives and kill our children. Thanks a lot, Moses. We're gonna go in there, and now Moses has the whole assembly against him. Not just sort of disagreeing with him, angry at him, fearful for their lives. Next verse. Why is the Lord bringing us, and they're talking to God here. They're not just talking to Moses, they're talking to the Lord. They knew God brought them there. This is severe, y'all. This is very severe. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? They had already predicted the defeat. They'd already concluded that they would not survive in the promised land. They'd already determined the outcome and presupposed that God wasn't going to do anything to help them or deliver them. Even though they had already seen them defeat the Amalekites when they raised Moses' hands, still they wouldn't believe. Why are they going to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? Next verse. And they said to each other, we should choose a leader and go back to Egypt. A couple things that stand out to me in this part of Scripture here, in this event that happened. Number one is that it started with the 10, right? The 10. And their report spread to the whole assembly. So the seeing the problem and murmuring and complaining about the problem rooted in disbelief and unbelief was like a wildfire that spread throughout their whole community. And they wept, they complained, and they longed for Egypt. And the problem with that, you see, this will determine where you end up. And so all of them who complained, ended up dying in the wilderness. They didn't make it in the promised land. It determined the outcome of what God wanted to do in their lives. You see, here's the thing. Doubt will keep us from where God wants to take us. And only Joshua and Caleb, they were the only two in that generation that made it into the promised land. Not even Moses made it in, because he represented the law. Joshua was a type of Christ representing the promise of rest. And so we call it the Joshua generation. You know, there's a generation of kids who are like, I don't care that my parents were a bunch of hippies who rejected Christ. I'm going to believe Jesus for myself. Come on, somebody. This is a Joshua generation of people who says, I'm going to believe the good report. I'm going to trust God. I see this rising up in our country right now. I see young people. I see these generations, and we talk about the transgender problems, and we talk about these social issues, and we talk about a lot of these things, but I'm seeing an army, I'm seeing a wave of a generation of people, and I'm seeing these people restoring our country back to our Judeo-Christian roots. I see this happening. Come on, somebody. I see things shifting. I see God moving, and it's a belief and a humility. I'm going to trust God. I don't trust what they're saying on TV. I don't trust what the celebrities are saying on the Grammys. I don't care what the movie stars have to say. I don't care what Beyonce has to say. Oprah can go take a hike. I'm going to trust the Bible. I'm going to start listening to these teachers again. I'm going to start putting my faith in a God. I want something real and eternal in my life. I'm tired of every which way the wind blows. I'm a woman this day, I'm a man the next. I don't even know what I am. Nobody can survive with that kind of environment. And we see this Joshua generation saying, I am going to believe God for myself. This is good stuff. You know, back when the Great Depression had, when that happened, in 29? Yeah, Great Depression. The Great Depression didn't have to happen. The Great Depression did not have to happen. This is one of the most obvious, devastating examples of when complaining moves into a whirlwind of problems. Because rumors began to spread that there was going to be an economic problem. And then you had a few fearful investors. Guys, listen to this. Just a few fearful investors who began to sell their stocks. And then all the other investors and all of this rumors and these few small group of people who began to sell and began to panic, it ushered in a complete panic. And that panic brought about the Great Depression, one of the most devastating financial situations and seasons and ruins that this country and the world has ever seen. Why? Because of the few influencing the many and impacting the outcome. There's a man named Dr. Travis Bradbury. He's a leading emotional intelligence researcher, and he explains that complaining rewires the brain for negativity. Same thing as Dr. Carolyn Leaf. When we complain, where we may have had neurological pathways, highways of belief, highways of optimism, highways of joy, highways of seeing the glass half full, when we begin to complain, we are literally rewiring our neurological pathways. We begin to see problems. We begin to see issues with people, with things, with the world around us. And the more we complain, the harder it becomes to see the positive or believe in the solutions. That's what this doctor said. You know, there's a physical toll that comes upon us when we complain a lot. And I've been there. I'm the first one to raise my hand. I have been there. I've complained. I have murmured. I've complained. I've done it all, just like I'm sure you have too. I need Jesus just as much as you need Jesus. Come on, somebody. I've questioned God and asked God and, all of that. And it takes a physical toll on our bodies. Our blood pressure goes up. Our immune system goes down. Anxiety and depression set in. So you got to be very careful with what you choose to say. Very careful about what you choose to believe. You've ever had I don't know about you, but when I grew up, we had these whistling kettles. You know what I'm talking about? You put the water on, it starts boiling and the steam starts coming up and then it starts to slowly, kind of quietly, you get that little whistle. And the longer you let it sit there boiling, what happens? The louder that thing whistles. And that's the way it is. The longer we dwell and focus on the problem, the bigger and louder the problems become. I have bent myself into a pretzel worrying about things in my life. I have lost sleep worried. I have panicked worried about things. And you know what? None of it ever happened. Because when you start to focus and you start to, and I've got a ruminating mind. My mind, ask my wife, once I lock into something, I'm like a pit bull. I need to kill it, beat it to death until I can move on and think about something else. And this is a problem for me. I got to do things. I got to take herbs and go for runs and sometimes take some calm, whatever I need to do to stop my mind from ruminating and racing. This is my issue. But I'm just here to tell you that when you can focus on something that is a nothing, it's a lie, it's a nothing, and build it up into something so big that you think you're gonna die. Just like the Israel, we're gonna die, everything's gonna fall, it's not gonna work, God, what are you doing? For some of us, just for the sake of our mental health and our body, just start focusing on positive things. Go watch some funny videos. Go watch some army fail. Because laughter does good like a medicine. If you're like me, I don't laugh very easily. But when I do laugh, boy, I can laugh for hours. And it's like medicine. And sometimes I'll just inject laughter. I'll watch some fail army. This is kind of gross, but I've been following this guy and he does these fake fart sounds in public. And I don't care what my wife thinks at this moment. I was laughing so hard because that tickle comes, that laughter bug comes, and I know it sounds really juvenile, but sometimes you need to disconnect your brain from all of the pressures and responsibilities and allow yourself to laugh. I don't care what you're laughing at, just don't laugh at God and His promises. My wife has such a beautiful, easy laugh. And my wife and her dad laugh exactly the same way, like a chainsaw. Should I do an impression? I better not. I'm keeping my mind on the positive this afternoon. It's the same with sour milk. You can have a glass of spoiled sour milk and a big gallon of fresh milk. And you pour that glass of sour milk into the whole batch, and what happens? It ruins the whole thing. A little leaven leavens the whole lump, Jesus says. My third point. Ooh, this is good stuff, isn't it? Different spirit. A different spirit will lead you to victory. A different spirit will lead you to victory. Numbers 14, 6 through 9. Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had explored the land, tore their clothes. I like that. Back then, when they tore their clothes, this was like, I am so appalled. I'm so disgusted. I'm absolutely just beyond, this is outrageous. This is what it was. It was a symbol of absolute extreme anger and frustration and disapproval of something. This is what a different spirit is. How can you not believe God at this point? Why are you cursing the God who brought you out of Egypt? Why are you, they're so distraught at this whole situation. Now they've got this whole problem. And these guys were like, we're right there, y'all. We're right there. Next verse. And said to the entire Israelite assembly, the land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. He's like, look, y'all, this is so good. Next verse. Is there a next verse? Yes. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land. Do not be afraid, because we will devour them. We will devour them. Oh, don't you love that spirit? Come on, I want a captain like that, right? If you're down at halftime, I want the Eagles to come back. I want some like we got this. And their protection is gone. Their protection is gone. But the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. Fear has a way of really immobilizing us. I hate, I've confessed it, I really hate to fly. I mean, I'm learning to actually kind of like it. Because as soon as I land and I'm safe, I'm like, that was cool. I like that. I want to do that again. And then when it comes time to fly again, I'm like, no way. The fear will knock you off your post. Fear will cause you to not take the job because you don't want to fly. Fear will prevent you from saying yes to that promotion and that job opportunity. Fear is powerful. It's very powerful. Fear is a killer and it's a stealer of life. Trust me, I know from firsthand experience. So Joshua and Caleb were among the very, very, very small minority. 2 people who said, I'm not going along with the crowd. You know, that's what I love about believers. We're different. We're peculiar. We are believers. We believe God. We believe things. We're not like the world. We're not like everyone else. We don't respond like everyone else. We don't think like everyone else. I hate it when I see people who just think like everyone else thinks. No critical thinking, no ability to really discern something or say, well, just because everyone else thinks this doesn't mean I'm going to think this. This is what I want to teach my kids is be a different kind of spirit. Be a different kind of person. Don't just go along with what they go along. Be unique, be different, be peculiar, stand out, be a freak, be whatever. But don't go along with everyone else because most of the time, the popular majority is wrong. Jesus was on his way to heal this man's daughter. And on his way there, they sent word from the house and they said, don't trouble the teacher anymore. She's dead. She died. It's over. Jesus turned to those people with him and he says, don't be afraid. Just believe. I feel like that's the word for you this morning. Don't be afraid. Just believe. Oh, but she's dead. Don't be afraid. Just believe. Yeah, but my husband walked out of that. Don't be afraid. Just believe. But I just lost my job. Don't be afraid. Just believe. Be different. There's a gentleman named Nick Vujicic, born with no arms and no legs, no limbs, for no reason. They have no explanation for it. All of his siblings are fine. He was born with no arms and no legs, which inevitably led him to being bullied. He struggled with depression, and he had thoughts of suicide. What is the point of my life? Why did this happen to me? But instead of caving to fear and self-pity, he chose faith. And he chose purpose. And today, he has become an international speaker, evangelist for the gospel of Christ, and an inspiration to millions of people. He is a great speaker, better than me. Way. His story is so powerful. He's so confident. It's like, what? Aren't you supposed to be really depressed and sad? And aren't you supposed to be really kind of full of self-doubt? But no, he's the opposite. He's married. He has children. Married a beautiful woman. He'd say things like, I always told myself, how can I ever be married? How could I be a husband? I can't even hold her hand. But he said, but I can hold her heart. This is a different spirit. I want to ask you this morning, what do you see? Do you see the problems or do you see the promises? I'm going to ask you, what are you saying out loud? Are you complaining, murmuring, or are you speaking faith? And I want to ask you, what will you do? Will you go back? Or will you trust God? In Numbers 14:24, I close with this. But because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit it. Your faith, your conviction, your courage, your different spirit will not only allow you to inhabit your promised land, but your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren. Your faith means something. God is a generational God, and I am not gonna let my children down because I didn't stand boldly in faith and march into the promises that God has for me. Come on, let's stand to our feet and worship.